Two friends meet up to drink some beers and talk about past times. Not yesterday, but long ago, it's scandals, wars and crimes. From Stalin's reign to Prohibition, Tudors, Pompey, Bush and NASA's mission, Edison's bulk, Genghis Khan's rise to victory. Forget your old teacher, it's time for Pint-Sized History.
Hi there, and welcome to the Pint-Sized History Podcast. I'm Joe.
I'm Zack.
And we're back for part 2 of the Vietnam War. And like a lot of our...
All along the watchtower. It cannot get no excited. I can't get no relief.
Like a lot of our part 1s, we tease what's going to happen, and then we don't really talk too much about the war itself or whatever the conflict is. This time is the exact same as those previous times. We're getting right into it with the bow-wow, American troops on the ground and all the stuff that comes with it as we begin part 2. Very quick thanks to our sponsor, Crate. Ooh, that sounds nice. You can get one of those Crate Brewery beers yourself at a discount if you go to the website and put in the code Pint-Sized1515, and you can get yourself some nice discounted beers. Now, Zack.
Let me just quickly
not
taste
again,
this hazy IPA.
Every time.
Oh, that is magical.
Wow.
Much better than the last, which was also magical.
So by saying that one's good, you're saying that the last one wasn't good?
I literally just said the last one was magical.
Oh, whoops. I don't listen to him. No, that's not how this podcast works.
Pint-Sized 15.
All right, here we go. So, part 2, Zack. I can't help but notice that the picture behind us has changed.
Yeah,
and
go
now...
watch on YouTube. Go watch on YouTube. Go watch on YouTube.
Go watch on YouTube. Oh, yeah. Well, no, I mean, watch it anywhere. We don't mind where you watch it. But
yeah,
YouTube,
it makes literally no difference to us.
Yeah, it makes no difference to us. But obviously, you know, I see, you get to see some visuals, you know, Zack's lovely face if you're on the YouTube podcast. And
or Joe's...
Excuse me?
Devilish smile.
Like
that smile, that damn smile.
I try to do my best Joe Biden where I'm like talking and then just, you know, just get the smile like big out, you know, just really nice and juicy. Anyway.
We're on episode 1. So episode 1, why don't you tell me what happened in episode 1?
God, yikes. No, what happened in episode 1 was World War II, and the Japanese took over the French Indochina, which is where Vietnam is.
Listen.
And then the Allies helped the conservatives, the revolutionaries, the commies, get it back. And as they're about to take it back, the French take it back from themselves, seize in the day and take that power back. And what happens after that is the French obviously rule, and it's imperialist and it sucks. So the Viet Cong and the Ho Chi Minh team decide, fuck this, we ain't having this. We're going to go and take back our country. So they take back the north half before it becomes basically one big civil war. And that's when the Americans start to go, well, we should probably help the South Vietnamese with their democratically elected leader, who actually isn't very democratic at all. He's just more of a commie hater. And, you know, they basically do their best to hold on. But after it becomes clear that the North Vietnamese aren't going anywhere, the Americans decide, enough is enough. We're going to go in guns blazing. President Kennedy, he did a lot in his 4 years in power, 3 years in power before he was shot in the head.
Wow, violent!
Was it Dallas? In Dallas? It was in
yeah.
Texas.
Lee Harvey Oswald,
which is an episode I think we probably will do at some point, because that's a very...
boring.
It's not boring, Kennedy. Are you joking?
I'm joking.
And so, so that's where we're at right now. And now we're ready for part number 2 as Zack takes the floor.
Yes, and the best way, I think, to talk about the Vietnam War, as I said in episode 1, is through the American lens, and to look at it through the Americans' point of view, because I think that just like quite well dictates what happens. Everything they do is sort of in lockstep with what the South Vietnamese do, because it's really not a South Vietnamese war, it's an American war. They take all, basically, the decision-making out.
It's not called the Vietnam War in Vietnam. Call it the war against the Yanks.
Is it?
Well, obviously not Yanks, but yeah, they call it the American War.
How dare you? We have 20% United States listeners, and you call them Yanks. I for one love our American listeners.
I can't stand this from you, because you said this on our very first podcast at D-Day. You was like, can we call them Yanks? That's not an insult. The word Yank is not an insult. It's like calling...
Yankee fucking doodle.
Well, that's an insult, but to call someone a Yank isn't an insult. I'm telling you right now. It's like when the Australians call us
tomato,
Poms.
tomato, and it's definitely tomato.
Okay, all right. I want you to go to an Australian podcast, write in the comments, stop calling us Poms. It's insulting. You're not going to, because no one gives a shit.
No one cares. I don't care about Australia.
Exactly, and it's the same for the Yanks. And if you are insulted by the term Yank, I'm sorry, but get over it. I mean, no, but we do love you, though.
Yeah,
we love our Americans.
Joe, do you know what the domino theory is?
No.
You couldn't take an educated guess based on the name.
I think that when one domino hits another, then hits another, and hits another, it starts a chain reaction that causes nuclear war.
No. Good try. The domino theory is basically prevailing political thought in the American leadership, and it's basically suggesting that, like, when one country falls to communism, all of its neighbours fall to communism.
Of course.
So you have this knock-on effect of, for example, the Korean War,
Yeah.
North Korea becoming communist, South Korea becoming communist, Japan becoming communist, China was already communist. But then even the Vietnam War, if Vietnam becomes a communist state, you have Laos becoming communist, Cambodia becoming
The
communist.
whole region could become...
And they are all basically communist countries, except from, I don't think Thailand is. But I'm not actually sure. I really don't know. Any Thai viewers out there, because we do have some. Any Thai viewers are watching this, comment on the Spotify channel and say if Vietnam, Thailand is communist.
I don't think... Did anyone other than dogs hear you in that moment? That was so high-pitched.
That's so fucking deep. What the hell, man? I never savaged you like that on one of your episodes. I told you before this episode I was feeling nervous.
I'm not
Here we are.
I'm not savaging
Digging
you.
me out in front of all the viewers.
I'm not savaging you. I'm just saying that sentence was
You're a
more,
dick,
was more
man.
high
You're a
pitched.
dick.
More high pitched than those whistles you use to talk to a dog.
Oh, right, okay, cool. So the domino theory, Eisenhower is supporting South Vietnam on that basis. He's basically saying, put military advisors in, support them with economic aid. Just your face right now is pissing me off.
I've done nothing wrong, Ray.
And he knows that the South Vietnamese need the USA to help them defend themselves against the North. So he sends them all this equipment and stuff like that. So Kennedy comes in 1961, and he basically says that we can give them equipment, we can give them advisors and stuff like that, but it is their war to win.
Yeah.
The only problem is that all the organizations around the US state at that time are saying that the South Vietnamese cannot win this war. They cannot do it on their own, and they need help. So he ramps up the amount of advisors and stuff that go to Vietnam. But unfortunately, in November 1963, he is assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas. It's quite a shame that Kennedy is assassinated because he's accomplished like loads in his first
He accomplishes a shit ton.
He does a lot. And,
in like 2 years, he does so much. And we obviously Cuban Missile Crisis is
we've already done
the most dramatic moment, if any.
It's unclear basically whether Kennedy would have stopped or would like limited the amount of US support going to Vietnam, but it doesn't matter anyway because by 1964 President Lyndon B. Johnson has taken office.
Yes,
and he
civil rights
wholeheartedly, yeah, he's probably had quite a good like domestic president.
Wasn't he really unpopular except for that one thing? The civil rights.
Yeah, he was great for civil rights, and he had.
But I swear, apart from that, he was like really bad.
Yeah, but I don't think he was bad. He was unpopular, but not bad. I think he had his New Deal, which was quite successful. Johnson commits like heavily to the war, and he's like, "Okay, we'll Americanize the war. We're going to send a shit ton of troops. We're going to do the fighting for the South Vietnamese, and the war from literally Johnson coming in explodes, and you have the next few years before like 1968. You've got like hundreds of thousands of US draftees being sent every year to Vietnam, and the draft is not particularly fair. The draft, you can get out of it if you're like a student or you're married or something. So the draft like disproportionately affects like ethnic minorities and lower income Americans, like working class Americans. So black people are a huge proportion of the amount of troops going to North Vietnam, way above their actual like microcosmic standing in American society.
Yeah, like behind you.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying any point by it, I'm just pointing out.
There's a black man in the
There's
picture.
there's an African American literally
But there are also
walking,
two white
and he
guys.
looks, and I'm looking at that photo.
He looks tired.
He looks tired. I was going to say he looks young. I'll get a visual of this and zoom it in so you can have a look a bit better than what we're looking at. Yeah, he looks really young in that photo, as do all of them. And they would have been. I mean, Jesus, they were some of them would have been teenagers.
So like before the kind of draft comes into like effect, a lot of them want to be there. Like the advisors and like the tens of thousands of people over there, they're typically like veterans of the army, and they want to serve there, they want to help the army. Then the draft comes in, these people just don't want to be there, and that really like comes into like an even more like exaggerated effect when Nixon comes in. The war's like really unpopular. On August the 2nd, 1964, the USS Maddox is fired upon, apparently off the North Vietnam coast. Supposedly it's fired on by torpedo boats. 2 days later, the USS Turner Joy is also fired upon. We know that now in 2005, declassified information has suggested that there were no torpedo boats.
Really?
But this incident leads Congress to approve the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gives the president the power to make any unilateral decisions about the Vietnam War and provides a legal justification for the US invasion, basically, or not the US invasion, the US support to South Vietnam.
Jesus.
And it's basically expanded on heavily by Johnson. He takes the powers of the president like unbelievably out of where they should be to another level, and he is the true commander-in-chief, just making decisions for the people about South Vietnam and the Vietnam War. Following this, the US then began a bombing campaign of North Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, aiming to cripple the North Vietnamese.
Is this where the bombing campaign begins?
Yeah, Operation Rolling Thunder and Operation Arclight.
And it was pretty brutal.
And also, really, really important to point out just now that the Vietnam War is not limited to Vietnam. It includes loads of Laos and Cambodia. A lot of the fighting happens in Cambodia, and Laos and Cambodia are also bombed really, really heavily, along with North Vietnam and South Vietnam.
Interesting.
Because Ho Chi Minh and the Sihanouk trails ran through Cambodia and Laos, and that was where all the support for the South Vietnamese Viet Congs were going from the north.
I was going to say collateral damage, but actually it's not. It's literally the damage they impose to inflict, but they're doing it over other countries because they just don't care.
Yep, likely that as well. Towards the end, when Nixon's time, it literally is that they don't care.
They're just
chuck a
flying
shit ton of
them
bombs.
out,
So apparently the Allies, or the US basically, dropped more than 7.5 million tons of bombs on Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia between 1965 and 1975. That's more than twice the amount dropped on both Europe and Asia during the Second World War.
Wow.
So
wow.
Insane, right? Like,
yeah,
immense.
Is that counting for bigger bombs, or what does that mean? That just means just like in terms of pure damage.
Yeah, pure like TNT.
Twice as much. Yeah, I mean that's insane, really, because those campaigns were happening for years. Well, I guess in theory, Vietnam was happening for years, but Vietnam's one place. It's one country. It's a relatively big country, but all over Japan.
This is quite thin though. It's not that big.
It's quite big though, isn't it?
I think it's long, but it's not necessarily like a big country.
But the point being, it's not a small country, but to say, that it beats Europe and Asia over the World War.
Yeah, and this is during the Blitz, right? Like the Germans dropping massive amounts of bombs and incendiaries over European countries before they invade, and the Americans firebombing Japanese cities, and us destroying basically all of Germany in the Second World War. And it dwarfs it. Absolutely dwarfs it. 4 million tons of bombs are dropped on South Vietnam. 1 million on North Vietnam. And interesting that 4 million dropped on South Vietnam, not on. Cause obviously, then
to get out
to get the Viet Cong out. Because the Viet Cong are in South Vietnam, so they're not dropping the bombs.
And I bet you a bunch of those were hunches. They think they're there, but they have no real idea. So they're actually just bombing on villages that could hurt their own people.
Pretty much exactly, yeah.
Yeah. John McCain was a bomber.
Yeah,
the US senator that fought against Obama in the
did he get captured?
President. Yeah, he did. In the presidential election, he was an American bomber that flew over Vietnam, and he got the plane fell down. Not sure if the people that he was with died as well, or if a few of them survived.
I think they did. I think he was like one of the only survivors. Something.
But he was in a prison in North Vietnam for like
they don't treat you very well in this
few years, and he was treated pretty poorly, and that's why he had a limp for the rest of his life.
You can Google for yourself the life of POWs in North Vietnamese camps. I haven't really touched on it in this, but it's pretty bad. You get to play Russian roulette, basically. Good fun.
The deer hunter.
So there's 2 million bombs also dropped on Laos and 0.5 million tons of bombs dropped on Cambodia. The Americans also dropped 400,000 tons of napalm and used 19 million gallons of herbicide in their bombing campaigns, which is like an environmental disaster. That's the only word for it. And not only that, but I'm about to talk about what napalm is, so that'll become clear about why it's so fucking abhorrent.
Here we go, the iconic napalm of Vietnam.
Or...
I can't remember the other name for
Agent Orange.
Agent Orange? Oh,
Agent Orange.
Agent Orange.
Not Agent Orange. Agent, like 007.
I wouldn't have got that either way.
So napalm is an incendiary mixture of gelling agents or fuel and thickener. The Na in napalm comes from naphthenic acid, and which is the original gelling agent, and palmitic acid being the original thickener. So napalm.
You can actually see it again in the photo that was behind us.
Right, you can.
I know, that's why I keep looking in that. In the back, there is napalm being used in that moment.
It is an incendiary bomb that burns at around 800 to 1,200 degrees Celsius.
How much?
About 1,000 degrees Celsius.
Woo!
Which is pretty fucking
hot.
Napalm also burns longer than gasoline. It spreads more viciously over a target area, and it devastatingly sticks to its targets because it's part of it is a gelling agent. It will stick to you. It's a thickened viscous material and you can't get it off you. It was used in World War II and it saw limited use in Korean War, but it's used extensively in the Korean War.
In the Vietnam War.
Yeah, it becomes a vital part of the campaign. And it's also used as like a psychological fear-mongering tactic. Like it's there to
that's
spread
part
fear.
of it.
That's basically
it's the psychological aspect, isn't it? It's like if you're already fighting these like imperialists with these huge helicopters and big machinery and all these troops, and then there's like this fire as if it's like a dragon that's mouth breathing fire. It's like you would be terrified. I mean, there's no way you can't be terrified.
It's exactly that. Like it just spreads so fast and so rapidly over such a big target area, and importantly as well, it will suck the air out of an area. It's like, say someone is in a tunnel in this area where they dropped a bomb, it will pull the air out of the tunnel, out of the air itself, and you will suffocate in that tunnel basically.
The story of the original trilogy of Star Wars is based on the Vietnam War. The rebels are the Viet Cong, and the imperialist empire is the USA. Yeah, George Lucas said that he was in his thinking when he wrote it. Which obviously, I mean, the first Star Wars came out.
Napalm, the Death Star.
Maybe. I mean, it's kind of I mean, this is the nukes, I guess, because America is a nuke power, and Vietnam aren't. The first Star Wars came out in 1977. Am I right? I could be wrong. Is the Vietnam War ending in 1976? 5. Okay, so 2 years before. So you can imagine that it would have been very much in his thoughts when he was writing it. And he talked about that years down the line.
Yeah. Napalm causes severe burns, and one napalm firebomb released by a low-flying plane can damage an area of about 2,500 square yards. There's a famous picture of Phan Thi Kim Phu, who is a Vietnamese girl, and she is, if you know the picture, we probably can't show it here for censorship reasons, but it's the picture of the girl who's got like her arms outstretched, crying on a road away from a Vietnamese village, and she suffers napalm burns.
Yeah, it's one of the most famous photos ever, especially one of the most famous war photos ever, is these Vietnamese children, including this girl, completely naked, crying, running away from these American soldiers. It's extremely evocative, which was why it was such a famous photo at the time, and is still now one of the most famous photos of all time.
She's now the founder of a charity dedicated to helping survivors of war.
Really? That's a cool fact.
Child victims of war.
I did not know that.
Yeah, very interesting.
That's a really cool fact.
So if you want to look for the photo, her name is Phan Thi Kim Phu, which is PHANTHIKIM PHUK.
Yeah, it's a very famous photo.
Yeah, if you just type in the Vietnam,
I mean, if you just type
Vietnam,
crying
Napalm,
girl Vietnam, you'll see the photo. It's one of the most famous photos.
I think the original name of the photo is the girl in the photo.
Really?
That is actually her original title in like American public. Moving on, the US have got like way more involved in the war now. Like they are literally bombing the hell out of South Vietnam and North Vietnam. And it's crazy interesting. I think I may have said this before, but they're dropping these bombs on South Vietnam, not North Vietnam, and that's because the Viet Cong are in South Vietnam, and they are the big enemy they're fighting. They don't really want to bomb North Vietnam. They don't really want to go invade North Vietnam, because if they do that, there's going to be repercussions with the Russians and the Chinese. Yeah. So they're sort of just avoiding that. And
is that Korean War? It's the exact same.
Well, yeah, but how well did the Korean War go?
No, I'm not saying the outcomes are worth it. I'm not saying it's the correct choice or not. I'm just saying the parallels.
It's probably the correct choice.
This American involvement, it's like they're just doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah. It was probably the correct choice of the Americans not to invade North Vietnam.
Absolutely.
They did one thing right.
They learnt from their mistakes.
And the North Vietnamese, in response to this increasing threat of the US soldiers there, they begin sending even more of their armed forces to the Viet Cong in the south. So the bolstering the forces of the Viet Cong. And the Viet Cong grow to around 100,000 men by the end of 1964. And the actual army of North Vietnam grows to around 1 million. And basically, by the end of the war, 70% of the troops in the Viet Cong are North Vietnamese army men. So the Viet Cong is essentially now just a branch of the North Vietnamese army. The US ground war then begins in March 1965. They land in Da Nang. And the public seemed to quite look favourably on this, the US public at the time. They're like, okay, cool, we're going in there, we're going to spread democracy around the world. And they shift away from Vietnamization of the war in terms of like helping out the South Vietnamese army to Americanization. They take the lead in all the matters. He says that the US will win the war by December 1963.
Lol. Lol. What do you say? They left
Christmas.
1975. They leave. It's like, I will finish it in 1963. Yeah, no worries whatsoever. Mug.
I think generals should never be taught to predict when a war is going to end.
It's morale building, isn't it?
It's going to be over by Christmas.
Exactly.
Berlin, first Paris, then Berlin.
Yeah, it's propaganda. It's like, if Market Garden goes well, we could have them within like a few months. It's
and then it didn't. If Market Garden did go well, then it would have been good because
but it didn't.
The only bridges over the Rhine.
Yeah, but it didn't.
I really want to do Market Garden. When I was thinking about doing
Let's
this
do it.
episode, I was also going to do Market Garden instead. But
Write it down.
Yeah.
Market Garden is an operation that happens. The British were in charge of organising in World War II after D-Day, taking on the Germans.
We dropped like hundreds of thousands of soldiers into Nazi-occupied Holland and Belgium, and it went terribly.
Yeah, it went
really bad. We got our butts kicked.
Mm-hmm. Cool name though, Market Garden. I like
Yeah, it is a great name. We then see this introduction as the US ground forces land in Da Nang and in South Vietnam of this thing called body count, which is essentially the way of dictating how many Vietnamese communists you've killed. And it's basically tallying up the amount of deaths. But unfortunately, what the US Army do is include unarmed civilians and civilians in this body count.
In a way to like reach a quota, essentially. How fucked up is that?
And the US report on this every day. So they'll say, today we killed this many thousand communists, and this many of our troops died.
That doctrine has gone so wrong. It's like the war was already extremely muddy and a bit like yikes to begin with, but to get to the point where you're like, we now have to sell ourselves as the way we're going to decide if we're winning or not, if we're succeeding in this random ass war where they have no clue what their objectives are anyway, is that we got to kill the right people. But because you make the right people so vague that people can just start saying, well, we've reached our quota because we killed 10 women and children in a Vietnamese village because they gave us the slightest interpretation that maybe they're hiding Viet Cong, is so past the point of no return for their morality or their idea of being the good guys in the war. But of course, because it's, America, you're going to pretend you are the good guys. It's awful. It's so bad.
Yeah, and the harsh reality of the Vietnam War is like we really don't actually know how many Viet Cong were killed, but we know millions and millions of civilians died. I think the percentage for civilians dead, apparently the Korean War was worse, but I don't think that's the case. I think it could be somewhere like 60-70% of people killed in this war were civilians, which is
that's a huge number because it was such a brutal war anyway. I mean, especially when it's going on for almost 20 years.
But anyway, the Americans, and it is disgusting, the Americans go on this dual principle approach of search and destroy and body count. So they don't really know where the Viet Cong are, so they're relying on intelligence and information, which is like incredibly loose, and they're getting told by their superiors, go into this village, there's a Viet Cong settlement there, root them out, kill them all. Basically, or find the Viet Cong there. But what they also have at the same time is this idea of free fire zones. So they have body count, search and destroy, and free fire zones. And free fire zones literally means if you see something in this village, gun it down. And this is
how crazy is that?
I don't know, like I don't want to say that every US soldier was doing it. I'm sure the vast majority were not, but there are some horrible cases which I will touch on shortly where there's companies that have literally massacred villages, and to what extent any of them were Viet Cong, it's whose guess? It's anyone's guess. Supposedly around 200,000 civilians are killed by the South Vietnamese army and US army, and they're mislabeled as enemies. And that's just a small chunk of the amount of people they're probably reporting as Viet Cong that might not be, and then there's civilians that are actually just civilians dying. So you can tell the effectiveness of their doctrine and their approach. Like, they don't know how to find the Viet Cong.
No.
They're there in this country they don't understand, with people they don't understand, and people who don't understand what they are. They're in some cases they move them out to something called hamlets, which are like barricaded forts that the US Army set up to keep villagers inside, basically move people out of their homes and take them into these hamlets to keep like watch over them. So they're uprooting their lives, going to this country literally half the world away in the name of democracy, and they're killing an unbelievable amount of civilians when they're doing it. It's basically as bad a moral justification of a war has ever been, I would say.
I'm sure. I mean, there's a lot of bad.
Like
ones.
the more
it's quite as a claim, because you could. I'm sure if you really think about it,
the moral justification is like the survival of South Vietnam and survival of democracy. But what it is in actuality is this horrible mess. You got to feel for the Vietnamese. Like it's not a good position to be put in.
Well, I mean, look. One thing I will say is kind of a blanket statement is that, you can kind of say that about any war, that you've always got to feel the civilians. At the end of the day, war is hell. And the only people that benefit usually are those that are making money from it, that are not involved in it whatsoever. Obviously, there are winners and losers on a geopolitical style. But the reality is the people that get hurt the most during war are the civilians. I mean, all the people that are displaced during any war. That includes World War II, World War I, the French that had to vacate their homes, the Russians that were pushed far into Siberia during the Nazi push to Moscow. All these different wars give these huge impacts to the civilians that are living in that area. This is one of the awful high-profile examples because it's essentially, these imperialists, which is what it is, going into a country and kind of giving up on the notion. I mean, not giving up in terms of what they say, but giving up on the notion of we are here to fight purely the Viet Cong. At a certain point, the generals started going, you know what, they've killed enough of our men. We're sick of them. I actually don't care if we kill some. It's like because you've done bad to us, we're just gonna fuck you guys up now, and we don't care.
The Vietnam War is the best word to describe the Vietnam War for the Americans is probably frustration. Like, you don't know where the enemy is. Your men are getting picked off by booby traps and hit and runs.
Yeah.
You can never be drawn into an actual fight. You can never get your revenge in war terms. So you're just suffering.
Yeah.
And you take your anger out or your hatred out on the first Vietnamese person you see.
Yeah.
So let's move on anyway, because this takes me, and I'm sorry to keep it really morbid and grisly here, but the Vietnam War is this harsh reality, and we're going to go talk about the My Lai massacre, which is probably the most famous incident from the entire Vietnam War. On the 16th of March 1968, Charlie Company entered the Vietnamese village of My Lai. Charlie Company have had a really low body count for the entire war. They've seen very little action, and they're getting really frustrated about the war and the way it's panning out for them.
Yeah.
They're under the command of Lieutenant William Calley, and they go into the village on a search and destroy mission. The mission turns into less search and destroy and more of just pure massacre.
Yeah.
They start rounding up unarmed civilians, women, children, the elderly, and Calley orders his men to start firing despite no opposing fire in the village.
Wow.
They went from house to house, rounding up civilians, murdering them. In some cases, they bayonet old people, shoot children in the back, and in at least one instance, they rape a girl and then kill her afterwards. It wasn't until a year later that the investigation happens and the stories of the details of the day are revealed. And Seymour Hersh, who's a journalist, publishes a story, and Calley's eventually charged with murder. But apparently his jail stint is incredibly chill. He does 5 years and then he's let out, and apparently works in the insurance business today. His defense was basically that he was under the commands of Captain Ernest Medina to kill everyone in the village, shoot on sight. But that's the reality of what's happening. Yeah, that's the reality of what happens in the Vietnam War, and it's pretty troubling.
I was going to say a sign of the times, but this type of stuff actually just doesn't stop. You'll get examples of this in any war, but this is one of the most gruesome examples in a war that's filled with gruesome examples.
Yeah, supposedly Lieutenant Calley actually digs a ditch, gets villagers to dig a ditch, puts them in the ditch, and unleashes machine gun fire on them.
So they're all standing in this ditch alive,
and
then just kills more.
So Joe, how do you think the war is being perceived in America prior to 1968? Because this is about where we are right now.
Well, I think one of the things that is so fascinating about 1960s America is that because of all the civil unrest and the civil rights movement and all this kind of it's the time of hippies and it's the music and it's the vibes are we are now expressing ourselves way more than
free love, man.
Exactly, free love. You're there to express yourself in a way that your parents definitely fucking couldn't. That's just not a thing your parents did. It's not a thing any generation really did before. You kind of just listened to what your government did and you did the propaganda they did. And finally, it's people that were willing to speak out. And what I imagine was this is one of the first times really of a free nation like America realizing this is actually one of the problems of being a free nation, is that we've got people that we can't really round up enough, because if we do, everyone's going to hear about it and everyone's going to know about it. It's we kind of have to let them cook. So if they're saying this war sucks, our government sucks, we should not be going to Vietnam. Vietnam's nowhere near America. Why do we care about this war? This makes no difference to us. We're losing our young men and we're gaining nothing for it. What's the point? They can't, because they are democracy, silence all those critics like you would if you were in a dictatorship. You kind of have to let them breathe and suppress them as much as you can within legal boundaries. And I'm sure some are legal boundaries. So I imagine that the voice of America is quickly becoming, why the fuck are we here?
Okay, cool. I'll bear that in mind. But yep, you got some good points there. And I'll tell you why I'm going to bear that in mind, because we're coming to the Tet Offensive. And this is, I'll explain in a second why what you said just then and why I asked the question is relevant. The Tet Offensive happens in 1968. It's a Vietnamese public holiday for the Lunar New Year. And the South Vietnamese and Americans basically thought that there was no way that the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese would stage an offensive or try and fight or do anything on this day. They got this completely wrong. They underestimate the communists, and it leads to a wide-scale offensive literally against massive cities and towns and villages all across South Vietnam. They catch the Americans completely by surprise. Hanoi basically believed at this point that it would cause a huge insurrection, Hanoi being the capital of North Vietnam.
North, yeah.
They believe it will cause a huge insurrection when they see the South Vietnamese cities falling to the Viet Cong Liberation Front. It doesn't do that. And actually, in all honesty, the offensive turns out terribly. The Viet Cong suffer horrible losses, and they couldn't grab onto anything that they did keep in that day. They did keep the city of Hue, which is the homeland of imperial rule in Vietnam, where the emperor would sit. It's like basically the most like spiritual place in Vietnam, Hue. Right. And they did massacre thousands of South Vietnamese in Hue when the communists captured it. But it does poorly. It does shock the Americans, and it shocks the South Vietnamese into the fact that the North Vietnamese could have this massive scale operation. But what it does do, really importantly, is show the American public that the war is not going well.
Yeah.
And
because all they've been fed is propaganda.
The Americans have been told, literally since the start of the war, every day, every week, this is how we're
smashing it.
We killed this many people. Yeah. We're doing great. We're liberating this country. Yeah. We're spreading democracy. And now the American public is seeing for the first time, oh my God, we're literally being lied to.
We're getting
this is going terribly. There are pictures of GIs in the streets of Saigon, which is the South Vietnamese capital. The embassy in South Vietnam is attacked, and a number of staff members are killed by the North Vietnamese. So while this offensive does terribly, and it has like no real tactical victory, there's huge losses for the Viet Cong, it does an even bigger, better thing for the communists. And it turns the American public for the first time against the government. Before that, the Americans did protest the war. There was an anti-war movement, but it's not until after the Tet Offensive where the anti-war movement spirals into this crazy, crazy movement that basically forces the hand of the American government and changes the course of the American presidency against the war.
And like I said earlier, would have been one of the first times that you've had that in any place. Like, obviously, there's, distrust in what the government are doing or the king is doing, and they will fight back until that person is relieved or whatever. But, during wartime, the vast majority of nations shut up and let their leaders do what they need to do because they're
Churchill cook.
They're programmed to believe that what they're doing is the right thing. They're fed propaganda, they're fed whatever until they think that. And so in America, this huge country, biggest superpower in the world, huge nation, hundreds of millions of people. And for the first time, you're kind of getting this example of how democracy does work in a way. It's like, well, look, now we have people standing up and saying, this is not right. And we can't just shut them up. We can't just shoot them in the street and just be like, they were all, they don't trust us. That's treason.
You say that, but they do shoot them.
They try. They try.
No, not even that. At Kent State University in Ohio, the American National Guard literally opens fire with live ammunition on a group of protesters at the university.
Wow.
And they kill 4 students, injure 9 others. But
maybe I'm giving too much credit to the Americans as if they just let this happen.
They do it. They throw tear gas and shit, and they beat the hell out of anti-war protesters because they're hippies. And the anti-war movement is not supported by the majority of Americans. I think it's like there were newspaper reports suggesting that 3/4 of Americans didn't support the anti-war movement. The fact that you're saying you got on your own streets, your own National Guardsmen in the beacon and champion of liberty and democracy, shooting protesters in the street. It's insane.
I think any nation that it starts suppressing young university voices, that's like a huge L. Yeah. That's big L's. That's big L's in the chat.
The breeding ground of communism, Joe.
Big L's in the chat.
When does communism happen? It's universities.
It's like, come on, man. The universities are cool. That's where you get the people that are like big ideas, and they're going, well, maybe this isn't right, and all this stuff, and L's in the chat.
Yeah, there's like recordings of Richard Nixon after that Kent State University attack, and he says, oh, they got they took a hell of a lot of it there, didn't they? It's really quieting down the anti-war movement there.
Really?
He's literally saying the killing of Americans' own citizens in their country for protesting in a war, and the idea of shooting them has quietened down the anti-war movement.
It's kind of like someone that has no ideas about dictatorships. Actually, of course he does, but it's like someone that has no idea about dictatorships is just going like, wow, maybe
terror works.
Maybe they've got it right over there.
Nixon is like such a meme. So you have this massive anti-war movement growing. You have insurrections in some cities in the US. You have like anti-war groups like Black Panther and the Weathermen, who are literally trying to bomb US civic office buildings.
Wasn't Black Panther in Forrest Gump?
Yep.
They represent them.
Accidentally stumbles on one when he's trying to get Jenny out of it.
Funny.
I love you, Jenny. Yeah. Hey, man.
And
Hey,
he runs
are
into
you stopping the cars, brother?
So what were the Black Panthers? They were basically like...
Black Panthers and the Weathermen. So Black Panther are a civil rights movement that are like less peace, more violence.
Yeah.
Because since then, the American civil rights movement has been mostly non-violent and or basically all non-violent under Martin Luther King. And the Weathermen are a anti-war movement. They're quite like left-leaning, basically like Antifa today. Probably less of the reputation of Antifa, but like harder actions than Antifa do. Like Antifa wish they were the Weathermen, basically. And this eventually all culminates in President Johnson being so unpopular that he doesn't stand for the 1968 presidential election, which I don't know if I can really explain how big a deal it is for a sitting US president not to stand for re-election.
Yeah.
It is enormous. So he's so unpopular. The Vietnam War has killed his popularity that he's been forced by this anti-war movement and the lack of favorability he has to stand down.
And the country is, power hungry. The politicians are power hungry. They want to be at the top. So for anyone to just say, you know what, I don't think I've got this in me because everyone fucking hates me. That's it's a step out of turn.
Yeah.
Then they could have got Bobby Kennedy, who would have been an extremely popular president.
Don't jump ahead. Don't jump ahead. There's a couple alternatives to him. In the Democratic Party, you got Bobby Kennedy, our power Bobby.
Bobby.
How much you love him?
I really like him.
He dies.
Oh.
He gets assassinated.
Oh no.
We're robbed of a great president.
Yeah.
He would have been the GOAT.
He was pretty cool, I think. He just seemed vibes, he seemed chill vibes, Bobby, and he also helped stop the world from blowing up in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah. Big respect, because if you haven't watched that episode, big respect.
You didn't see on the sorry. You didn't see, if you're not watching the video podcast, you didn't see Joe literally touch his finger to his mouth and then put it up in the air and go, big respect.
Yeah, but it is true though, because if you didn't watch the Cuban Missile Crisis, you might not know that Bobby Kennedy was the only voice in the room during that crisis that told his older brother, the president, to not escalate. So all the other people in the room were like, we should escalate, we should invade Cuba, we should, tell the Russians to F off and all this. And all of those actions would have easily started a chain reaction, which would mean that everyone listening to this right now would not be here. It would be a complete different world. It would have been nuclear warfare. Everything would be different. But Bobby Kennedy, the younger brother of the president, were literally the main voice in the room saying, do not escalate. Let's see if we can find any way out of this conflict. So for that reason alone, he is a legend.
He's assassinated anyway in 1968.
Cool. Yeah.
And he probably would have been a de-escalatory president and pulled America out of the war pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, probably at the South Vietnam's demise. But anyway, he is killed, and then I think a few days before that, Martin Luther King is also assassinated.
That's right.
So you have in like the span of a few days or a few weeks, two massive voices for like civil rights and anti-war in the country just murdered, and it's terrible. I don't want to get Tim Pot at all on the podcast at all, but like it does make you think like so soon after each other, both of them gone. And I'm sure like there are organisms in the American society and state that didn't want to see either of them, but to what extent they're like state sponsored is like another question.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's certain conspiracy theories I'll listen to. That one, maybe, but I don't know. I think that's a huge cover up. If you get that wrong, you're fucked. Yeah. Because those are two of the most popular men in the country. Anyway,
there's this massive swelling of resistance in the US at the time, and in 1968, the presidential election happens, and we have who I consider one of the worst US presidents of all time, Richard Milhous Nixon, elected, and he comes into power in 1969. And he's elected on this anti-war footing and this policy of Vietnamization. So going away from the Americanization of the war, going away from US troops leading to arming and tooling up again the South Vietnamese army. He doesn't go through with it. He's kind of listened to all of the organizations around him who have said, we cannot do this, it's not really going to work. So he launches a secret war. And this secret war is essentially an intense carpet bombing campaign of Cambodia. And
what's carpet bombing?
Carpet bombing, is that not quite self-explanatory?
No.
So carpet bombing is you bomb somewhere, but then you really bomb somewhere, and that's carpet bombing.
Yeah.
It is like, think of the carpet in your living room. So you bomb every square inch of that carpet.
Imagine your carpet is a city.
Yeah,
and it has loads of big buildings.
Your carpet is a country, and you've...
by the end, it's a carpet.
You've dropped a bit of soy sauce and ketchup and mayonnaise on some spots. and all of a sudden someone comes in with a bucket of paint and chucks it in the middle of the floor. That's carpet bombing compared to normal bombing.
That's a weird way to put it.
Yeah, that wasn't my best analogy, I can't lie. He also puts US troops on the ground in Cambodia for the first time. This is also a really unpopular move because he's saying we're demilitarizing, we're de-escalating, but then he's moving the US Army from South Vietnam into Cambodia. And the whole point of this is the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and it's attacking the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Cambodia. Loads of Viet Cong fighters are coming over the border from Cambodia. They're attacking quickly in South Vietnam. They're going back to Cambodia to say havens, like safe havens and like sanctuaries, and then coming back again only to do it again. So it takes the fight to them. It doesn't really do anything there. It's a pretty poor effort of like stopping the war or stopping the Viet Cong. What it does do, however, is breed deep resentment for the Cambodians against the Americans, and later leads to the rise of the Khmer Rouge. And the Khmer Rouge are the Cambodian communists who eventually start the massive Cambodian genocide.
The genocide. That's 70s, a bad 80s. One. That's a real bad one.
Yeah, because of the resentment to the West and America bombing the shit out of their country, which is pretty fair enough.
Not the singer.
So we're now coming towards 1970, and Nixon does start making good on some parts of de-escalating the war. So he does pull out 25,000 troops, but like really importantly, US soldier morale is collapsing. So all the new draftees are from like the Greenpeace anti-war generation. He has actually made the draft a lot fairer. Like he stopped it from being about like different exemptions. He said everyone's got to do it. It's based on your birthday. Yeah. And shockingly, the first what I saw when I was watching a documentary about this, the first birthday that was read out was January the 4th. I was like, oh, that's fine. That's my birthday. So I was like, oh, right, I'm going to Vietnam. Fair enough.
That's a weird way to do it.
I think it's a good way of doing it.
Why?
If you're born on this day, you're going. And there's no unfairness. There's no like social elements to it. It's just, if you're unlucky enough to have this birthday, you're going.
But what if the government's got a thing against Sagittariuses?
Well, yeah.
You know?
Could be a big astrologist.
Yeah, exactly. What if Nixon was actually a big astrologer?
I hate the Pisces.
Yeah.
I can't stand the Pisces.
The Scorpions suck.
Is that what his voice is like? I hate the Pisces.
I can't tell you.
Something like that.
No.
But like bulldog.
I guess what you're saying is true. I guess it makes more sense in other ways.
Rather than having like exemptions for like being married or being like a university student or having a bit of money or your parents being able to get a lawyer to get you out of it.
How can you do a draft in a country that big in a war that's so external? It's nowhere near your own country. It's just mind blowing that you would ever draft your own people.
So this is exactly what I'm saying. So the US morale collapses and you get new recruits who don't want to be there.
Yeah.
And they've got the old guard who've been there for years, who are like military men, and you got these new draftees. And they're like, private, go down the road and make sure it's fine. And the private's like, no, I'm not doing that. And you get a rise in what's called fragging. And fragging is this like, it sort of grips the US Army at this point, and it refers to the idea of like
bullying, basically.
No, it refers to the killing or the wounding of a superior officer. So this happened loads, like thousands of US Army men, and in the Marines it happened loads as well. But if they didn't like a captain of theirs, they'd drop a frag under their tent or something like that.
Wow.
Or wait till they go to the toilet, chuck a frag nearby.
Chuck a frag grenade.
And render them out the war.
That's really what fragging is.
They don't want to take orders anymore. They're kind of sick of this war. They don't want to be there. So they kill some of the superior officers. By the end of 1970, he announces another 150,000 troops, Nixon, will be withdrawing from the war, and takes the American numbers down from like the peak of around 500,000. But there were about 3 million people in the overall army in total. And he takes the numbers down to 265,000. And the war seems to be coming to an end for the Americans bit by bit. In the meantime, in the north, Uncle Ho dies.
No.
Uncle Ho dies in 1969.
Uncle Ho. Ho Chi Minh.
Very and the Politburo moved from this idea of Southern First, of swelling insurgency in the South, to a Northern First doctrine, which basically means they're going to send all their troops through the Ho Chi Minh Trail into the South and get ready to take over the country. And by this time, 1970s, the Viet Cong is about 70% Northerners now. South Vietnamese are like really ill-equipped still. They can't really deal with the idea of American continued withdrawal. The war's coming to an end. They're pretty fucked. They haven't got a good army. They haven't got the material or equipment or structure to deal with the North Vietnamese. And we move into 1972 now. And the North Vietnamese launch the Easter Offensive. And they're over on northern provinces. And they test the might of the South Vietnamese. The Americans are now basically stepping back. And they're going through Vietnamization. They're saying, we'll give you air cover, but you got to fight this battle. And every time they do it, they're terrible. They can't do it. They fail on pretty much every front spectacularly. Then we get to 1973 and peace and ceasefire talks happen. So they basically agree that the war's going to end in 1975, or the Americans were withdrawn in 1975.
They're going to gradually decrease their numbers bit by bit, over and over, until there's eventually barely anyone left.
So there's a super reduced presence now in South Vietnam. Basically, the US Army by 1975 has all but left South Vietnam. Nixon's ousted following the
Watergate. Sorry, I don't know why that took me so long.
Good job. And Gerald Ford comes in and he says, oh my God, the South Vietnamese can't withstand this. We need to give them support. Congress says, we've had enough of this. It's time for this war to end. And they pull out, and the communists start plotting their massive offensive in 1975. On the 10th of March, 1975, the North Vietnamese launched Campaign 275 into South Vietnam, which is a major success, like well within their expectation, well outside their expectations, sorry. Spurred on by that, they launched another final offensive in April 1975, and they eventually encircle and capture Saigon, the South Vietnamese capital, on the 30th of April. Apparently, somewhere between 200,000 to 300,000 South Vietnamese are sent to re-education camps following the fall of Saigon, which is what life is going to be in store for them under North Vietnamese rule. And South Vietnamese surrender, and on that day, on the 30th of April, after 19 years, 5 months, and 20 days of war, which cost a total of up to 3 million Vietnamese lives, potentially up to 2/3 of those being civilians, the war is over. And there's massive losses from Cambodia and Laos as well. Around 58,000 American soldiers have died, and 303,000 American soldiers are wounded, which is intense.
Yeah.
And that's it. On July 1976, Vietnam's merged into a socialist People's Republic, and it is still the same today.
Still the same, which is why their flag is super, super socialist. Commie. If you know the Vietnamese flag,
it's just a red.
It's just a red star or a yellow star on a red background.
And Cambodia becomes a communist regime under Pol Pot, which eventually leads to the Cambodian genocide.
Yeah.
And Laos becomes People's Republic too, where 30,000 former officials are sent to re-education.
So they actually did way worse. Like by the end of it, the region is way worse than when it started.
Yeah, pretty much. they ruined it. But I mean, I guess like they held it off.
Yeah, it could have been like that in the 50s for all they know.
Yeah. And I think one of the most crazy things about the Vietnam War is that there is so much unexploded ordnance still in Vietnam today. Yeah. So apparently, since the Vietnam War, 42,000 people have died due to unexploded ordnance in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And a lot of the land is hazardous, and a lot of the farmland is untenable because of it.
Wow.
The main note as well, besides that, which is probably not as big of a deal as I made out to be, but still pretty quite interesting, is that it brings down this veil of the Americans being this like really strong superpower who can
win anywhere.
Yeah, the greatest superpower. We can win here, win there. We got the best intentions.
Yeah,
they have embarrassed themselves like immensely.
Yeah, but it was gradual. It's not like the Americans went in there and lost heavily straight away, because it was kind of a seeping wound that festered until eventually they just gave up. Yes, it shows that they are weaker than maybe people expect. The power that they project isn't as strong as maybe it could be, but at the same time, it's not as if they had lost by a staggering amount in the early days. They stemmed the noise around. I mean, I don't think the Americans. I bet if you were to ask the American public about what was the ending of the Vietnam War, I bet a bunch of them don't say the USA lost. I bet it's still considered in their country that it was a draw or something. I bet that's a...
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Just because, they pretended as if it wasn't that big a deal.
You might be right, yeah. But who knows? Let's ask our American viewers, do you think you won the Vietnam War? I
don't think that's a particularly harsh question, Charles. Yeah, to our American viewers, which, like you say, that we actually do have quite a few. In American culture, in American schools, are you taught, when you're speaking about America in that involvement, do you consider it a loss? What is the What's the consensus in America?
Yeah. I'd be intrigued to see what the Americans think, though.
Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to hear their take.
I want to discuss the Vietnam War because it's like so fascinating. It's a cultural icon. It's like it spawned a generation of music and films and this kind of like anti-government.
Yeah, it shaped USA culture, and by proxy, it shaped world culture.
Yeah. And I think it's probably the first time that we've learned as a world not to trust our governments, probably as well. I think it's
It's not the first time.
yeah, I think it's the first time. I think it's probably one of
Do
the
you think the Germans fell after World War II?
probably stabbed in the back.
Oh no, that was World War One.
I think the prevailing thought is like our government are not in our best interests all the time.
Yeah.
And that's now
At least on a national scale, in terms of being able to realise and think for yourselves, this was certainly a groundbreaking moment for Western democracies. And as the world becomes, less safe for Western democracies, you can see that this is the culmination of it. Essentially, that people are less trusting of the governments now in Europe and America than they've ever been. And to consider that there was a time in America where this war was so unpopular, and it's still less. They still trust their government less now. It's a sign of how things are.
And just to also add, Vietnam today is a socialist republic. It's a very corrupt country. It's got a poor human rights record, but apparently a lovely holiday destination. So go. And that's it.
Thank you very much, mate. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Thank you for listening, Joe.
And thank you for listening in, guys. We appreciate your support so much. Don't forget to buy any great beers that you can.
Great beer! Pint-Sized 15!
Breweries.
PMTs,
We like beers.
SSADD 1.5.
We wouldn't be Pint-Sized history without beers. We'd be history. And apart from that, thank you.
Sized history.
We're sized history. And apart from that, thank you very much. And we'll see you in the next episode. We don't know what it's going to be yet, but you'll find out when you see the thumbnail. So
Cheers,
enjoy.
guys. Love you so much. Miss you all. Bye-bye. Rate 5 stars. Comment. Love you all.
Bye.